Hello, my name is Gerald Young. I'm with the International City County Management Association, and I'm part of a team that's going to be presenting today on international applications of performance management, as well as a little snapshot of what's going on in the U.S. And my co-presenter here, depending upon whether he's to my left or to my right, would you like to introduce yourself, Dr. Ho?
Yeah, my name is Alfred Ho. I'm currently a faculty member at the University of Kansas, and I do research on performance management, governance, and budgeting issues in the US and also beyond. And also, I will be soon transitioning also to a faculty member position at the City University of Hong Kong. So I will be crossing the border quite a bit.
All right. Well, we had a couple of slides that we wanted to share with you today, and let me just bring those up for everybody. All right, so as we're talking to you about what's a rather broad topic today, wanted to give you a little bit of sense of what's going on in the US in terms of performance management. It is a fairly widespread practice, but it's not universally widespread. It tends to be among those, I wouldn't necessarily call them larger jurisdictions, but those over 50,000 population. Smaller jurisdictions are engaged in performance management as well, but as you can imagine, it's in some cases a resource challenge, whether that's staff time available to devote to the task, or the budget that might go into some of the software that helps to share that information with the public or even among staff. The level and sophistication of performance management also varies. Fairly universally, those jurisdictions that do engage in performance management in the States are tracking at the very least the input and output data, but most of them that are trying to, again, share this with their elected officials and the public are looking as well at outcome measures to determine whether they are accomplishing the goals that they've set for themselves. And they are typically doing that either by specifically and formally tying their performance data to strategic plans, or then putting together a scorecard that will show the public whether they are achieving those goals that they've set for themselves, and if not, why not. Those that are a little bit more transparent about it are also sharing what they plan to do to make up for the fact that they might not be achieving their goals quite yet via an action improvement plan, as in this case from Greer, South Carolina, or other reporting on kind of the return on investment that they might be achieving or that they hope to achieve with what they're measuring or implementing. I think some of the more sophisticated jurisdictions that are out there, and this is from the city of Kansas City, Missouri, are also reporting not just, hey, what did we spend on this? How many staff were devoted to it? How many widgets did we produce? But also experimenting with their data to see whether there is something that tends to be correlated with higher performance. In this case, they were looking at code enforcement, specifically the condition of properties and whether they were substandard or in need of some remediation to get them to the point that they were not dilapidated or in need of routine maintenance to keep them from becoming dilapidated. And in this case, their hypothesis was that higher percentage of property owner occupancy was going to be correlated with lower numbers of violations of the municipal codes. And what they found is that there was no such correlation. If there had been, you would see basically a declining line from left to right. And that was not the case. The percentage that were owner occupied were no more likely to have low numbers of violations as rental occupied properties. I think one of the more common steps that jurisdictions have been taking in their performance management over the last 10 to 20 years, really, has been benchmarking that performance to see how they are doing compared to their local peers or their peers of maybe similar circumstances around the country. It may be that Decatur, Georgia, for instance, compares to a group of similarly sized organizations nationwide. In this case, the Valley Benchmark Consortium in Arizona compares to about 13 other jurisdictions within Arizona to see how they stack up. And what I've found really interesting about this, particularly for the topic at hand today, is that this was not an idea that they came up with on their own. It was an idea that they adapted from the experience of the Municipal Benchmarking Consortium in Ontario, which eventually grew to a Canada-wide initiative. And in the case of Arizona now, it's an example that's being followed by other organizations in the US to see what they can learn from the Arizona and Canadian experiences. And I think one of the key steps for them is that they are not just collecting data, comparing data, but looking at the underlying definitions and issues that go behind that data. So as, for instance, they are looking at parkland, the definition of parkland might vary a little bit from one organization to another. And we tend to think of that as fairly straightforward, but in some organizations, particularly in a wide open state like Arizona, they may have acres and acres or square kilometers or miles of open space, mountains, valleys, that are not necessarily active park space where you might have a soccer game going on, but for them, in some cases, that's still qualifying as park space, and it's really a matter of defining with their peers what they want to include in those measurements or exclude from those measurements. A couple of other international applications of performance management that ICMA has collected over the years have been put together in our ebook on performance management. It does include a section on international applications stretching from Latin America to China to, actually we also have a contribution that Debbie Johns had shared with us from APSE. And we followed that up with an online discussion via ICMA Connect, where people from other nations are also able to share their experiences, their reporting styles, and it's something that we really want to really make a peer-to-peer exchange. So I encourage any of you that are affiliated with ICMA to go ahead and check these particular resources out. But as we get to the last slide in our presentation today, I have a more general link that I can provide to you as well. But with that, I wanted to transition very briefly to one of the larger issues that we're all facing right now, and that is COVID. And the challenge with COVID is certainly public health related, but it's also in terms of sharing of data. And in the US, it is typically counties that are the public health agencies. So I have a couple of examples from both here, a large county, and secondly, a small county, showing how they are sharing that data. And I think it kind of mirrors what you're seeing in the other performance management data, in that, in this case, Montgomery County, Maryland, is benchmarking themselves against other counties in the area, allowing you to see visually and in the raw data how they are stacking up, and hopefully driving some change within the public in terms of the behaviors that go along with spikes in cases. And likewise, attaching that to the goals that they've set for themselves so people can see fairly easily whether they're achieving those goals or not. Pitkin County, Colorado is a much smaller jurisdiction, and they are benchmarking not only for what's going on in their county, but also looking at the data that's coming out of individual hospitals, so that as people are trying to figure out, hey, is my hospital reaching that level of not having the capacity to serve additional patients? I would like to know that. And it's really um, it's a sad situation that we're all facing, but it's a terrific opportunity to build that trust and engagement with the public around data. So I think it's terrific that cities and counties are sharing the extent of data that they are right now. And both here at the bottom left, Pitkin County is looking at racial and ethnic data as well, since it does seem to have a significant tie into what we're seeing in terms of cases. And then finally, Alexandria, Virginia is taking that data and mapping it not just for the disease processes associated with COVID, but the social services that they're providing as well, whether that's rental relief or food assistance in this case, and then tying that to the geographic information of their various neighborhoods, which, again, as you're trying to engage with the public, is a way that they can very clearly see how it's impacting them. But with that, I'd like to turn things over to Alfred, and if you'll bear with me a second, I will bring up his slides as well.
Thank you, Gerald. I think this is really a good segue to what I am about to talk about. And what you have just seen really shows that performance management is actually a very complex capacity building, the intensive process. So you can see that actually it goes from strategy planning, goal setting, to a lot of departmental planning, to resource allocation planning, personnel planning, to engaging citizens, to have the council members, elected officials, approval of your budget, of your plan, and then to operational management, personnel management, and internal communication, to evaluation, and then to public engagement, public reporting, so that the public understands and know what you have done for them and show the value of public service. The whole process actually takes a lot of time and engagement. And of course, if you actually also have auditors, I know the UK has a lot of auditors looking also into the performance issues and working with local governments and also national agencies. So if you have auditors, they also may use the information to engage the public and policymakers. So you see that the whole value chain is complicated. It takes a lot of efforts to do. And that's why it's actually go back to Gerald's point that it's not easy for small jurisdiction to do a lot. And for largest jurisdiction, they may have the capacity to do this. So next one, yep. So we have performance information to go through all these stages. And I just also want to emphasize that to make a difference in the long run, it really takes a long time. When I did my research on in this area and looking back into the history of this, I should actually applaud what ICMA has done over the years. And back in the US, it actually even went back to the turn of the 20th century when New York Bureau of Municipal Research actually did a lot to encourage local governments in the US at that time to think about all kinds of outcome and performance-driven issues. And at that time, they already engaged citizens to think about how they should actually, quote unquote, survey, meaning actually analyze the performance issues. And so they really were the pioneer. And US now is doing a lot, as Gerald actually have presented, but it really has taken US almost 100 years to get to the point. So, when I talk about some international trends, I want to emphasize that this is a long-term effort. Next one. And so I have done my work in different countries. And so I'm going to highlight a few interesting trends that I want to get your attention to. Next one. And so first of all, I would like to highlight something going on in China. In 2015, China passed a new budget law that actually requires what they call budgetary performance management. And it requires and expects national agencies as well as all local governments, subnational governments to report and analyze performance information so that they could be more effective and also more accountable. And also given that trend, there are a lot of local governments in China now are experimenting what they call one-stop service. And so meaning that they actually use all kinds of technologies, big data, and also apps and web portal to basically let citizens and business go to one place, whether it's on the online or in the app, to just do some of the services, but just once, and then they will actually correlate the whole service, whole value chain, so that they don't need to go back and check and go to different departments. So this is all driven by the whole data-driven performance management exercise that China is going through right now. So there are a lot of interesting things going on there. In Southeast Asian countries, some countries are also doing performance budgeting, mostly at the national level, but also trickle down to a little bit at the local level in some larger cities. Next one. Another interesting trend that I've seen when I travel overseas and work with different officials is that New Zealand just have a new initiative called well-being budgeting. And so in our performance budgeting exercise, traditionally, we look at input, output, and outcome measures, but mostly are departmental goals, and then you try to see whether you're achieving those goals. In New Zealand, they now talk about beyond the program activities, outcomes. They want to look at whether the budget allocation really make a difference in the quote unquote well-being of citizens. And so they now become more driven, more focusing on the happiness and well-being, also public health issues on citizens, and drive all the departments and programs to think about those long-term well-being issues. And so it has some interesting kind of twists of the outcome-based, evidence-based budgeting and performance management exercise. And I think it's an interesting trend to watch, especially if you think about many of countries and also local governments are struggling with the COVID and also the post-COVID issues. And so how well-being will be tied to performance management, citizen reporting engagement, and also value-based management will be interesting to see down the road. In the US, we also observed that in San Antonio and many other cities, now they start to talk more about equity budgeting. They have a tool called Budgeting for Equity. And I start to see more local governments also want to think about it. So when we think about performance management, a lot of times traditionally, we only focus on efficiency, effectiveness, number of caseloads, etc. Now they really want to get into the equity dimension. And Gerald just also talked about that in the reporting of the COVID in Alexandria, I think, and really show how cases are distributed in different locations, also across different demographic groups, so that they really tackle the equity concerns. So this is another trend I think we should watch more carefully. Also, when I recently co-edited a special symposium about COVID and the fiscal implications for different countries, we find out that actually a lot of governments, including UK and all European countries, are really struggling with the fiscal implications of this. National governments basically are borrowing a lot of money to handle this crisis. And at some point, it's going to trickle down to local governments. A lot of local government will be asked to do more with less. And so we also could see that performance management will be all going back to that new normal trend about doing more with less, and may also have to think about how to tie into zero-based budgeting. So this is another trend that I think we all have to think about. Next one. Yeah. So another trend I think we just talked and touch upon briefly using Kansas City as an example is how to think about big data and how that may change performance management, especially at the local level. Because at the local level, we have been collecting a lot of data, especially among the developed countries, right? And so from administrative records to website data, what people care about, to social media data, to even sensor data, video cameras data, if you think about traffic control, etc., to mobile app data, GIS map-based data, to survey data, right? And so there are a lot of data there. And so in Kansas City, I have helped them to do a project that actually integrate the quarterly survey data with some of the complaint data and also crime data to see whether what they have done or what they failed to do are correlated with the perception of citizens and see what they could improve further. And so if you think about this chart, basically you need to integrate all the data, clean up the data, encourage interdepartmental collaboration to pull the data together and then analyze it and then go back to the traditional performance benchmarking, key performance indicators, KPI initiative to harness the information intelligence of the data, and then use it to integrate into the strategic planning, operation management, right? And in the middle, you also could try to use some elementary data analysis, visualizing the data as Gerald actually has presented earlier, and then discuss the result with your employees to see whether you actually could do something better. So Kansas City is a very good pioneer effort, pioneer in this kind of effort. And so I think this is something that we could watch for, and how to integrate big data or data analytics into the performance management exercise. And at the end, you also want to report the results to the public and engage them to talk about what government should do differently. So, yep. So at the end, what I would like to conclude is that this is not an easy exercise. If you actually think about all the dimensions in performance management, different strategies from engagement to internal operations to public relations, public reporting, communication, there are a lot of pieces that we need to put together. And so this is indeed a long-term effort. Next. Yep, so it's a complex system.
Yes. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to share this with you, and both of us have our contact information on the screen right now. As I mentioned, I also have a URL for performance management generally on the ICMA website. We would certainly encourage you to continue to engage with both of us as we really try to continue this international dialogue, and we thank you for inviting us to join you today.